Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
Rhett Coulter stood at his kitchen window, watching the charcoal grill heat up in the backyard. The July sun beat down on the concrete patio he'd poured himself 3 summers ago, back when his knees didn't protest every morning. At 62, he still moved with purpose, but his body reminded him daily that 40 years in the steel mills had left their mark. The doorbell rang. Rhett wiped his hands on the dish towel and walked to the front door. Through the glass, he saw Kyler's silver sedan parked in the driveway. His son stood on the porch, one hand on 6-year-old Mila's shoulder, while Renee held 4-year-old Jace's hand. "Dad." Kyler stepped inside first, giving Rhett a brief handshake. At 34, he carried himself like a man who expected things to go his way. His polo shirt was pressed, his khaki spotless. "Thanks for having us." "Course." Rhett knelt down to Mila's level. She had Kyler's dark hair, but her mother's sharp green eyes. "How's my girl?" "Good, Grandpa." Mila grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "I can swim underwater now. Watch me today." "I will." Rhett straightened and nodded to Renee. She was 32, but looked younger, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and workout clothes that probably cost more than his grocery bill. "Renee." "Hi, Rhett." Her smile was tight. It always was. Jace hung back behind his mother's legs. The boy was small for 4, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and a thumb permanently attached to his mouth. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Hey there, buddy." Rhett crouched again. "You ready to swim?" Jace shook his head and pressed closer to Renee. "He's been cranky all morning," Kyler said. "Probably just tired." Rhett studied Jace's face. The boy's eyes darted between his parents and the floor. Something in his expression reminded Rhett of a dog that had been kicked too many times. "Well, come on back. I got the grill going." The backyard buzzed with typical summer activity. Mila ran straight to the above-ground pool Rhett had installed last year, while Kyler grabbed a beer from the cooler and settled into a lawn chair. Renee sat beside him, her phone already in her hands. "Jace, go get your swimming suit on," Kyler called without looking up from his beer. The boy stood frozen by the sliding door. "Did you hear me?" Kyler's voice carried an edge that made Rhett glance over from the grill. "My tummy hurts," Jace whispered. "Your tummy's fine." Kyler set down his beer with a sharp clink. "Stop being a baby. I don't want to swim." Renee looked up from her phone. "Don't interfere," she said to Rhett before he could speak. Her voice was calm, controlled. "He does this a lot." Rhett flipped the burgers with more force than necessary. The boy stood there in his shorts and t-shirt, looking like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. "Fine," Kyler said. "Sit there and pout. But don't ruin it for everyone else." Mila splashed in the pool, calling for attention. "Daddy, watch me." She dove under and came up sputtering, proud of herself. "Good job, sweetheart," Kyler called, his tone completely different from how he'd spoken to Jace. Rhett watched Jace settle on the far side of the patio, away from the pool, away from his family. The boy picked at the concrete with a stick, his shoulders hunched. When Mila laughed loudly at something, Jace flinched. The burgers were ready. Rhett called everyone over to eat, but Jace remained in his spot. "Come eat," Rhett said directly to him. "He's not hungry," Renee said. "He barely touched his breakfast. Maybe he'll eat something now." "I said he's not hungry." Her green eyes fixed on Rhett. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rhett bit back his response. He'd raised Kyler to respect authority, to mind his elders. But watching a 4-year-old sit alone while his family ate felt wrong on every level. They finished lunch with forced conversation about Kyler's job at the insurance company and Renee's part-time work at a medical office. Mila chattered about kindergarten starting in the fall. Jace stayed silent in his corner. "I need to use the bathroom," Kyler announced, heading inside. "Me too," Mila said, following her father. Renee remained focused on her phone, typing rapidly. Rhett cleared the plates and walked toward the house. Rhett was washing his hands in the hallway bathroom when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to find Jace standing in the doorway, thumb in his mouth. "You need to use the bathroom, buddy." Jace shook his head, but didn't move away. Rhett dried his hands slowly. The boy was staring at him with those dark, serious eyes. "What's on your mind?" Jace glanced toward the living room where voices carried from the backyard, then stepped closer. He pulled his thumb from his mouth. I didn't fall off the stairs, he whispered. Rhett knelt down to Jace's level. What do you mean? Last week. Mommy said I fell off the stairs. But I didn't. What happened? Jace's small hands twisted together. Mommy and Daddy get mad a lot. The words hit Rhett like cold water. He kept his voice steady. Mad at you? Jace nodded. Without being asked, he lifted the hem of his t-shirt. Faint purple marks dotted his ribs, old enough to be yellow around the edges. Not dramatic, not fresh, but unmistakably finger-shaped that Rhett's jaw tightened. He pulled his phone from his pocket and quickly snapped a photo, making sure to capture Jace's face alongside the bruises. Can you put your shirt down now? Jace dropped the fabric and stuck his thumb back in his mouth. Did you tell anyone else about this? The boy shook his head. Rhett wanted to ask more questions, but footsteps echoed from the kitchen. You should go back outside now, okay? Go sit where you were before. Jace nodded and patted away on silent feet. Rhett remained in the bathroom, staring at the photo on his phone. The bruises were clear, deliberate. His hand shook as he saved the image to a secure folder. When he returned to the backyard, everything looked the same. Kyler was back in his chair, beer in hand. Renee was still on her phone. Mila played in the pool. Jay sat in his corner, stick in hand. But nothing was the same. Not anymore. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Rhett grilled chicken for dinner, made small talk, and watched Jace from the corner of his eye. The boy ate 3 bites of chicken and half a roll when Renee finally insisted he come to the table. He never eats, she said to Rhett. The pediatrician says some kids are just hicky. Maybe he's not feeling well, Rhett suggested. He's fine, Kyler said firmly. He just wants attention. When they left at 8, Mila hugged Rhett goodbye. Jace hung back by the car until Kyler snapped his fingers. The boy trudged over and submitted to a brief, awkward hug. Say thank you to Grandpa, Renee prompted. Thank you, Jace whispered. Rhett knelt down and looked him in the eye. You're welcome here anytime, buddy. Anytime. Something flickered in Jace's expression before Kyler called him to the car. Rhett stood in his driveway until the sedan disappeared around the corner. The house felt too quiet after they left. Rhett cleaned up the backyard methodically, storing chairs, covering the grill, skimming leaves from the pool. Physical work helped him think. When darkness fell, he went to his bedroom and knelt beside the old oak dresser. The bottom drawer stuck slightly it always had. Inside, beneath winter sweaters, sat a metal lockbox he hadn't opened in years. The key was taped to the underside of the drawer. Rhett sat on his bed and lifted the lid. Papers from Kyler's teenage years were neatly filed inside. Report cards showing declining grades. Suspension notices. A thick manila folder labeled Lincoln High School, Disciplinary Actions. Rhett opened the folder. The incident report was dated October 15th, 15 years ago. Kyler, then 19 and repeating his senior year, had engaged in a physical altercation with another student. The other boy, Tommy Morrison, suffered a broken arm and required emergency surgery. Rhett remembered that day clearly. The phone call from the principal. Racing to the hospital. Tommy's parents crying in the waiting room while their son underwent surgery to repair a compound fracture. The police report was attached. Multiple witnesses stated that Tommy had been walking to his locker when Kyler approached him. No verbal argument preceded the attack. Kyler had simply grabbed Tommy's arm and twisted it until it snapped. Unprovoked assault, the report concluded. Rhett had paid for Tommy's medical bills, hired an attorney to keep Kyler out of jail, forced his son to attend anger management counseling for 6 months. The juvenile record was sealed, and Kyler eventually graduated high school. It was an isolated incident, the counselor had assured Rhett. He shows genuine remorse. But reading the report now, Rhett remembered details he'd pushed aside. How Kyler had shown no emotion when Tommy screamed. How he'd watched the paramedics with clinical interest rather than guilt. How he'd apologized to Rhett, but never asked about Tommy's recovery. Rhett set the papers aside and pulled out his phone. The photo of Jace's bruises filled the screen. Yellow around the edges meant they were at least a week old. Finger-shaped meant they were intentional. Mommy and Daddy get mad a lot. The boy's whispered words echoed in Rhett's mind as he locked the papers away. Outside, a train whistle blew in the distance, carrying freight toward Chicago. Rhett sat in the darkness and planned his next move point 3 days after the barbecue. Rhett called Kyler at work. "Hey, Dad. What's up? I was thinking about the kids. You mentioned Renee's been busy with work. I could watch them sometime if you need help." A pause. "That's not necessary. We're managing fine. I'm sure you are. But I'm retired, got nothing but time. Might be good for them to spend time with their grandpa. I'll talk to Renee about it." Rhett expected resistance, but Renee called him that evening. "Kyler said you offered to babysit. I have a doctor's appointment Friday morning if you're serious." "Of course. What time?" 9 to 11. "We could drop them off around 8:30. "Perfect." Friday morning arrived overcast and humid. Kyler and Renee delivered the children with minimal conversation. Mila bounced with excitement about spending time with Grandpa. Jace clutched a worn stuffed elephant and said nothing. "He needs to eat lunch at noon exactly," Renee instructed. "And don't let him nap or he won't sleep tonight." "Got it. If he has a meltdown, just ignore it. He'll stop eventually." Rhett nodded, though the casual way she discussed her 4-year-old's distress made his skin crawl. After they left, Rhett made pancakes. Mila ate 2 and chattered about swimming lessons. Jace picked at half of one. "Not hungry, buddy." Jace shook his head. "That's okay. Maybe later." Around 10, Mila wanted to play outside. Rhett set up a sprinkler on the front lawn and let her run through it in her clothes. Jace sat on the porch steps, watching. "You want to play too?" Rhett asked. "I can't get wet." "Why not?" Jace looked toward the house. "I'm not supposed to. Your parents aren't here, and I say you can." The boy considered this. "Will you tell them that you played in the sprinkler?" "Why would I tell them that?" Jace's face brightened slightly. He stood up, then hesitated. "What if I get in trouble?" "You won't get in trouble with me." 20 minutes later, both kids were soaked and laughing. Jace's smile transformed his whole face, making him look like the 4-year-old he was instead of a miniature adult carrying invisible weight. While they dried off, Rhett asked casual questions. "Do you guys play outside at home?" "Sometimes," Mila said. "But Jace usually can't because he's in the quiet room." Rhett kept his voice neutral. "What's the quiet room?" "It's where Mommy puts him when he's bad." Mila explained matter-of-factly. "It's dark, and he has to be quiet." "Where's this room?" "The pantry. Mommy says Jace needs to learn to behave." Jace had gone still beside them. Rhett wanted to ask more, but since the boy was shutting down. "Well, there's no quiet room here," Rhett said. "Here, we just talk about things." At lunch, Jace ate most of a peanut butter sandwich. When Mila ran to the bathroom, Rhett seized the moment. "Jace, can you tell me about the quiet room?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't like it. It's dark, and there's no windows." "How long do you stay there?" "Until I stop crying." Jace wiped his nose. "Daddy says I cry like a baby." Rhett's jaw clenched. "What makes him put you there?" "When I'm bad. When I spill things or talk too loud or don't eat my food." "And do they hurt you other ways?" Jace nodded slowly. "When I'm really bad." "How do they hurt you?" "Pinching. Shaking me. Mommy twisted my arm last week." Rhett pulled out his phone. "Can you show me where they hurt you?" This time, Jace lifted his shirt without being asked. The bruises had faded, but were still visible. Rhett took several photos from different angles. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Teachers? Doctors? I don't go to school yet. And when the doctor looks at me, Mommy stays right there. She tells me what to say." When Kyler and Renee returned at 11, Rhett had the children clean and dry. He handed them over with a smile and said nothing about what he'd learned. That night, he created a file on his computer labeled Jace Documentation. He typed up every detail from their conversation, included the photos with timestamps, and saved it all to an encrypted folder. This was just the beginning. Rhett spent the next week gathering information. His first call was to Halden Sharp, Mila's kindergarten teacher. They'd met briefly at school enrollment, and she'd seemed like a thoughtful woman. "Mr. Coulter, is everything okay with Mila?" "That's what I'm calling about." "How has she been in class?" "She's a bright child, very advanced for her age." "Is there a specific concern?" Rhett chose his words carefully. "I've noticed some behavior at home that worried me. I wanted to get your perspective." "What kind of behavior?" "She seems very controlling with her little brother." "Bossy." maybe even aggressive. I wondered if you'd seen anything similar at school. Halden was quiet for a moment. Mila is definitely dominant with other children. She doesn't like sharing toys, and she can be quite forceful when she doesn't get her way. I've had to redirect her several times for being too rough during play. Has she mentioned her home life? Her brother? She talks about Jace sometimes, usually to say he got in trouble for something. She seems to think that's normal. Halden paused. Mr. Coulter, is there something I should know? I'm probably being overly cautious. It's just that Jace seems very withdrawn when they visit. I see. Well, children can certainly mirror behaviors they observe at home. If you're concerned about the family dynamic, there are resources available. What kind of resources? The school district has family counselors. And of course, if there are safety concerns, Child Protective Services would need to be contacted. Rhett thanked her and hung up. Her confirmation about Mila's aggressive behavior supported his growing suspicions. Children learned what they lived. His next call was harder to make. Quinn Delgado had worked as an ER nurse for 20 years before his union helped her get a better position at the county health department. She owed him a favor from when he'd helped her through her divorce settlement. Rhett, what's going on? How's retirement treating you? Can't complain. Listen, I need to ask you about something sensitive. Professional discretion. Of course. What's up? Do you remember treating a little boy named Jace a few months back? 4 years old, brought in for stomach problems. Quinn was silent for a long moment. Rhett, you know I can't discuss patient information. I'm his grandfather, and I have concerns about his safety. His grandfather? Her tone sharpened. Hold on, let me think. Brown hair, very quiet kid. Parents said he had stomach flu. That sounds right. I remember him. Something fell off about that case. The boy was dehydrated and underweight, but the parents insisted it was just a stomach bug. He had bruising that didn't match their story about him falling downstairs. What kind of bruising? Grip marks on his arms, like someone had grabbed him hard. When I tried to examine him more closely, the mother became very defensive. So they just wanted treatment for the stomach issue. Did you report it? I documented my concerns in his file, but without more evidence, there wasn't much I could do. The attending physician cleared him, and they left. I've wondered about that kid since then. If I told you I had evidence of ongoing abuse, what would you recommend? Document everything. Photos, dates, witnesses. CPS won't act on suspicions alone, especially from family members. They'll assume it's a custody dispute or family drama. You need concrete proof. I'm working on that. Be careful, Rhett. If these parents are really abusing this child, they won't hesitate to cut off his contact with anyone who threatens them. After hanging up, Rhett felt both validated and frustrated. Quinn's observations confirmed his suspicions, but her warning about CPS was sobering. He needed more than what he had. 2 weeks later, Rhett had another babysitting opportunity. Kyler and Renee were attending a work function Saturday evening and needed someone to watch the kids overnight. Are you sure you can handle both of them? Renee asked when they arrived at 6. I raised one boy. I think I can manage 2 kids for one night. Jace can be difficult at bedtime. Don't let him manipulate you. I'll be fine. After they left, Rhett ordered pizza and let both children stay up later than usual. While Mila played with toys in the living room, he had a quiet conversation with Jace in the kitchen. I have something for you, Rhett said, pulling a small teddy bear from a shopping bag. His name is Bruno. Jace's eyes lit up. For me? For you. He's special, though. He listens to everything and keeps secrets safe. The bear looked innocent enough, but hidden inside was a small digital recorder Rhett had purchased online. Battery life of 48 hours, voice activation, memory for 16 hours of audio. Completely illegal to use without consent, but Rhett was past caring about legal niceties. Can I take him home? Of course. But remember, he's very good at listening. So if anyone ever says mean things around him, he'll remember. Jace hugged the bear tight. Thank you, Grandpa. That night, Rhett tucked both children into the spare bedroom. Mila fell asleep quickly, but Jace clutched Bruno and stared at the ceiling. Are you okay, buddy? Will Mommy and Daddy be mad that I have Bruno? Why would they be mad about a toy? They don't like me to have new things. They say it makes me spoiled. Rhett sat on the edge of the bed. Bruno is between you and me. You don't have to tell them where you got him. But lying is bad. Sometimes keeping a secret is different from lying. Sometimes secrets protect people. The next morning, when Kyler and Renee picked up the children, Bruno was tucked discreetly in Jace's overnight bag. Neither parent noticed the new toy. 4 days later, Rhett's phone rang. "Dad, we need to talk." Kyler's voice was tight with anger. "What about?" "Jace has been acting up all week. Renee thinks your babysitting is confusing him. Maybe we should take a break from the visits." Rhett's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "What kind of acting up?" "Talking back. Refusing to go to his room when he's in trouble. Yesterday, he actually tried to run away when Renee disciplined him." "He's 4 years old, Kyler. Maybe the discipline is the problem, not the visits. Don't tell us how to parent our children." "I'm not. I'm just saying." "You're just saying nothing. We'll handle our kids our way." The line went dead. That evening, Rhett activated the recorder remotely using an app on his phone. If they were cutting off his access, he needed whatever evidence he could get. The audio files downloaded automatically to his computer. Most of it was ambient household noise, but on Thursday evening, he hit gold at Renee's voice, sharp and cruel. "You ruin every day, Jace. Every single day. You make us look bad." Kyler's response: "Don't fake cry. You're not sick. You're just weak." A crash, like something being thrown. Jace sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Renee again. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. Get in the quiet room. Now." More crying, growing distant, then silence. Rhett listened to the recording 3 times, his hands shaking with rage. Then he called Wesleyan Chase. Wesleyan had semi-retired from family law, but still took occasional cases. She'd helped Rhett navigate his wife's medical bills before she died, and he trusted her judgment. "Rhett, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need legal advice about my grandson. I think he's being abused." "That's serious. What kind of evidence do you have?" Rhett explained everything. The photos, the conversations, the recordings. Wesleyan listened without interruption. "The recordings are problematic," she said finally. "They were obtained without consent, which makes them inadmissible in court. But they could support a pattern if we have other evidence." "What about the photos?" "Better, but still circumstantial. CPS sees a lot of bruised children who aren't being abused. They'll want medical records, witness statements, documentation of a pattern." "What do you recommend?" "We need to be surgical about this. If you go to CPS directly with what you have, they'll likely dismiss it, especially since the parents can claim you're a disgruntled grandparent trying to cause trouble. We need to approach this strategically." "Meaning what?" "We file for emergency custody review through the family court. It's a higher bar than a CPS report, but it gets a judge involved immediately. And judges take grandparents' concerns more seriously than social workers do." "What are the chances?" "With what you have, maybe 50-50. But if we can find additional evidence, something that definitively proves a pattern of abuse, we'd have a much stronger case." Rhett stared at the photo of Jace on his phone. The boy's thin face and hollow eyes haunted him. "Do it," he said. "File whatever papers you need to file. Rhett, you need to understand. If we do this and lose, you'll probably never see those children again. These parents will make sure of that. And if we don't do it, that little boy might not survive long enough for it to matter." Wesleyan was quiet for a moment. "I'll start the paperwork tomorrow." The legal papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Rhett knew because Kyler called him at 7:43 a.m., his voice shaking with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Protecting my grandson. You filed for custody? Are you out of your mind? I'm trying to help a child who's being hurt." "Jace isn't being hurt. He's being disciplined. There's a difference. I've seen the bruises, Kyler. Those were accidents. Kids fall down, they get bruises. You're making something out of nothing. Kids don't get finger-shaped bruises from falling down." Silence on the other end. "Then, you're done. You understand me? You're done with our family. You'll never see these kids again." The line went dead. 2 hours later, Rhett's doorbell rang. A process server handed him official papers, complaint for harassment and interference with parental rights. The document, filed by Kyler and Renee, painted Rhett as an unstable and intrusive individual who has been systematically attempting to alienate minor children from their loving parents. It accused him of filling the children's heads with inappropriate questions about family discipline and creating confusion and anxiety through his interference. They were requesting a restraining order that would prevent Rhett from contacting the children or their parents in any way. Rhett called Westland immediately. "They're fighting back," she said after reviewing the complaint. "This is actually good news." "How is this good news?" "Innocent parents don't usually file harassment charges against grandparents who express concern. It shows they're worried about what you might uncover. But they could win. I could lose all contact with Jace. That's why we need to move fast. I'm requesting an emergency hearing for Thursday. The judge will review both complaints at the same time. What I need to do? Bring everything. Every photo, every note, every piece of evidence you have. And be prepared to testify about what you've observed." Wednesday night, Rhett couldn't sleep. He reviewed his documentation one more time, organizing photos chronologically, printing out his typed notes from each babysitting session. The audio recording was on a secure flash drive. Though Westland warned it might not be admissible, he thought about Jace's small face, the way the boy flinched when adults raised their voices, how he'd apologize for playing in the sprinkler. For years old and already broken, Thursday morning arrived gray and humid. The courthouse smelled of disinfectant and old wood. Rhett sat beside Westland in the gallery, watching Kyler and Renee confer with their attorney. They were dressed professionally, Kyler in a dark suit, Renee in a conservative blue dress. They looked like the kind of parents judges trusted. "Remember," Westland whispered, "stick to facts. No emotional appeals, no speculation. Just tell the judge what you saw and heard." Judge Patricia Rollins was a thin woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She'd reviewed all the filings beforehand and got straight to business. "This court is considering two related matters," she began. "A petition for emergency custody review filed by Rhett Coulter and a complaint for harassment filed by Kyler and Renee Coulter. Mr. Coulter, you may present your case first." Rhett stood and approached the witness stand. His hand shook slightly as he was sworn in. "Mr. Coulter," Westland began, "please tell the court about your relationship with your grandson, Jace." "He's my son's boy, for years old. I've been concerned about his welfare for several weeks now." "What prompted these concerns?" Rhett described the barbecue, Jace's reluctance to swim, his confession in the bathroom. He produced the photos on his phone, which were admitted as evidence despite objections from the opposing attorney. "And what did you observe during subsequent visits with the child?" "He told me about being locked in a pantry as punishment, about being hurt when he misbehaved. He showed me bruises that weren't from normal childhood accidents." The opposing attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Peterson, stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Coulter, isn't it true that you've been estranged from your son for several years prior to these recent visits?" "We weren't estranged. We just didn't see each other much." "And isn't it true that you disapproved of your son's marriage to Mrs. Coulter?" Rhett glanced at Renee. Her green eyes were cold, calculating. "I had concerns, yes." "What kind of concerns?" "I thought she was controlling, that she didn't seem to care much about the children's happiness." "So you admit you were biased against Mrs. Coulter before any of these alleged incidents occurred?" "I was concerned about her parenting, yes." "Mr. Coulter, have you ever been trained in child psychology or social work?" "No." "Do you have any expertise that would qualify you to distinguish between normal childhood injuries and abuse?" "I raised a child. I know what normal looks like." "You raised one child who was expelled from school for violent behavior, correct?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "That was different." "How was it different?" "Kyler never showed signs of being abused. His problems came from somewhere else." Peterson smiled coldly. "Or maybe you just didn't recognize the signs then, either." When Kyler took the stand, he was composed and articulate. He described Rhett as an increasingly unstable man who had been making wild accusations to confuse and frighten the children. "My father has never liked my wife," Kyler testified. "He's been looking for reasons to cause problems since we got married. These allegations are his way of trying to break up our family." "How would you describe your disciplinary methods with your children?" Peterson asked. "Age-appropriate and consistent. We use timeouts, removal of privileges, occasionally a light spanking for serious misbehavior. Nothing different from how millions of parents discipline their children." "Has your father ever discussed these methods with you directly?" "No. He's been going behind our backs, filling Jace's head with inappropriate questions, teaching him to be afraid of normal parental authority. Renee's testimony was equally polished. She described Jace as a sensitive child who sometimes misinterprets normal discipline as abuse. He's been having behavioral problems lately, she said. Increased defiance, inappropriate sexual behavior for his age, difficulty sleeping. All classic signs of a child who's been emotionally manipulated by an adult. Judge Rollins listened to everything with an impassive expression. When testimony concluded, she reviewed the photographs again, studied the written complaints, and finally spoke. "This is a troubling case," she said. "On one hand, we have a grandfather with legitimate concerns about his grandson's welfare. On the other hand, we have parents who claim they're being harassed by someone who disapproves of their marriage." Rhett's heart sank. It sounded like she was about to dismiss his petition. However, the judge continued, "The photographic evidence is concerning. While the injuries could potentially be explained by normal childhood accidents, their pattern and location suggest the possibility of deliberate harm." She turned to the court clerk. "I'm ordering a full investigation by Child Protective Services. Until that investigation is complete, I'm granting temporary supervised visitation between Mr. Rhett Coulter and his grandson to occur at the County Family Services office." It wasn't what Rhett had hoped for, but it was something. The investigation would give professionals a chance to see what he'd seen. Outside the courthouse, Kyler confronted him on the steps. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've made a big mistake." "The only mistake was trusting you to be a better father than I was," Rhett replied. The CPS investigation began the following week. Rhett met with caseworker David Martinez, a tired-looking man in his 40s who'd seen everything twice. "I want you to understand something," Martinez said during their first meeting. "Family disputes like this are complicated. Grandparents often think they see abuse when they're really seeing parenting styles they don't agree with. Look at the photos." Martinez reviewed the images on Rhett's phone. "These could be consistent with abuse, yes, but they could also be consistent with a clumsy child who bruises easily. We'll need more to build a case." "What kind of more?" "Medical records showing a pattern of suspicious injuries. School reports documenting behavioral changes. Multiple witnesses corroborating abuse. Something definitive." Rhett felt his hope deflating. "So one grandfather's word isn't enough?" "Unfortunately, no. We get a lot of custody disputes disguised as abuse reports. We have to be careful." Meanwhile, Westland was conducting her own investigation. She'd hired Trixie Voss, a private investigator who specialized in family cases. Trixie was a small, energetic woman with gray hair and the demeanor of a friendly librarian. Her specialty was finding information that others missed. "I've been digging into your daughter-in-law's background," Trixie told Rhett over coffee at a diner near the courthouse. "There are some interesting gaps in her employment history." "What kind of gaps?" "She worked as a dental assistant for 3 years after high school, then nothing for about 18 months. No employment, no school records, no apparent income. Then she surfaces working at a medical office in Wisconsin. Maybe she was taking care of family." "That's what I thought, but her family doesn't live in Wisconsin. They're all here in Illinois. So I started looking at court records in Wisconsin." Trixie pulled out a manila folder. "Renee Coulter, maiden name Renee Hammond, had a child when she was 19. A little girl named Emma." Rhett's blood chilled. "Had a child?" "Past tense. The child was removed from her custody when she was 2 years old. Neglect, failure to provide adequate medical care, and suspected physical abuse. Renee's parental rights were terminated, and Emma was placed for adoption." Jesus Christ. It gets worse. The case file mentions that Renee deliberately kept Emma out of daycare and away from extended family to avoid scrutiny. She also coached the child to lie to doctors about how she got injured. Rhett stared at the documents. This is exactly what she's doing with Jace. It sure looks that way. The pattern is identical: isolated child, suspicious injuries, avoidance of outside oversight. Why wasn't this found during Kyler's background check when they got married? What background check? This is Illinois, not the FBI. People get married based on a birth certificate and an ID. Juvenile dependency cases are sealed unless someone knows specifically where to look. Can we use this in court? Westland thinks so. Past termination of parental rights is highly relevant to current custody decisions. The judge will want to know why this woman was allowed to have more children when she'd already proven she couldn't care for them safely. Rhett felt a mixture of vindication and horror. He'd been right about Renee, but knowing she'd hurt another child before Jace made everything worse. There's more, Trixie continued. Emma's adoptive parents live in Michigan now. The girl is 16 and doing well, but she has permanent nerve damage in her left hand from an injury that wasn't treated properly. Permanent damage. Broken fingers that were never set. The adoptive parents say Emma was terrified of doctors for years after the adoption. She'd panic if anyone tried to examine her hands. That evening, Westland filed a motion to reopen the custody case based on new evidence. She attached Trixie's findings about Renee's previous child and requested an emergency hearing. Judge Rollins scheduled the hearing for the following Friday. The second hearing was different from the first. Word had leaked about Renee's past, and the courtroom buzzed with tension. Kyler looked pale and shaken. Renee sat rigid in her chair, her composed mask finally cracking. "Mrs. Coulter," Judge Rollins said after reviewing the new evidence, "were you planning to disclose your previous termination of parental rights?" Renee's attorney whispered urgently in her ear before she answered. "That case was sealed, Your Honor. I was advised it wasn't relevant to current proceedings. A previous termination of parental rights isn't relevant to a current custody case." The judge's tone was incredulous. "The circumstances were different. I was very young, struggling with addiction. I've completely changed my life since then. Have you? Because the pattern of behavior described in your Wisconsin case file is remarkably similar to what Mr. Coulter has observed with your current child." Peterson, the opposing attorney, tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, my client's past mistakes don't prove current abuse. She's been a devoted mother to Mila and Jace for years without incident." Without reported incident, the judge corrected. "Mr. Coulter's evidence suggests there have been plenty of incidents, just no one in a position to report them." She turned to David Martinez, the CPS caseworker. "What has your investigation revealed?" Martinez looked uncomfortable. "We've interviewed the children, Your Honor. Mila shows no signs of abuse and speaks positively about her parents. Jace is more complicated." "How so?" "He's extremely withdrawn and anxious. He becomes distressed when asked direct questions about home life. During the evaluation, he repeatedly asked if he was in trouble and seemed afraid to answer honestly." "What about the medical evidence?" "We obtained Jace's pediatric records. He's been treated for injuries 3 times in the past year, once for bruised ribs attributed to falling downstairs, once for a sprained wrist attributed to falling off his bike, and once for dehydration and weight loss attributed to stomach flu." "And your assessment of these records?" "Individually, each incident could be explained by normal childhood accidents. Collectively, they suggest a pattern of suspicious injuries that warrants further investigation." Judge Rollins reviewed her notes. "Mrs. Coulter, given your history with your previous child and the current evidence suggesting a similar pattern with Jace, I'm deeply concerned about this child's safety." "Your Honor," Peterson interrupted, "there's no concrete proof of abuse. Mr. Coulter's allegations are based on speculation and bias against my clients. The photographs aren't speculation, Counselor. Neither are the medical records or Mrs. Coulter's history of child endangerment." The judge looked directly at Kyler. "Mr. Coulter, what is your response to learning about your wife's previous termination of parental rights?" Kyler seemed to shrink in his chair. She told me about having a child before, but she said it was a custody dispute with the father. I didn't know about the abuse allegations." "You didn't think to investigate further before having children with someone who'd lost custody of a previous child?" "She said it was complicated family politics. I trusted her." Judge Rollins was quiet for a long moment, reviewing documents. Finally, she spoke. "This court finds credible evidence that Jace Coulter is at risk of continued harm if he remains in the custody of his parents. While the evidence against Mr. Kyler Coulter is largely circumstantial, his failure to protect his child from a partner with a documented history of abuse is itself a form of neglect." Rhett held his breath. "Therefore, I am granting temporary custody of Jace Coulter to his grandfather, Rhett Coulter, pending completion of a full forensic evaluation of the family. Mrs. Renee Coulter will have no unsupervised contact with either child until she completes a psychological evaluation and parenting assessment. The courtroom erupted. Renee jumped to her feet, screaming about the injustice. Kyler sat motionless, staring at his hands. Rhett felt tears running down his face. Furthermore, the judge continued over the commotion. I am ordering that Mila Coulter be placed with a suitable relative while these evaluations are conducted. Mrs. Coulter, do you have family members who could provide temporary care? Renee's attorney consulted his notes. Mrs. Coulter's sister, Ellie Hammond, lives in the area and has no criminal record. Very well. Ms. Hammond will be contacted for emergency placement evaluation. As the hearing concluded, Rhett watched Kyler and Renee leave the courtroom. Kyler walked like a man in trance. Renee's composure had completely shattered, and she leaned heavily on her attorney's arm. 2 hours later, Rhett stood in the CPS office waiting to pick up Jace. The boy appeared with a social worker, carrying a small bag of clothes and Bruno the bear. Grandpa, Jace looked confused and scared. Hey there, buddy. You're going to stay with me for a while. Are Mommy and Daddy coming too? No, just you and me. Jace considered this. Am I in trouble? No, son. You're not in trouble. But they are. 6 months later, Rhett stood on his back porch watching Jace carefully hammer a nail into a piece of pine board. The boy was building a birdhouse, his tongue sticking out in concentration. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, and he'd gained 8 pounds since coming to live with Rhett. The forensic evaluation had confirmed what Rhett had suspected. Jace showed clear signs of emotional and physical abuse, including symptoms of post-traumatic stress and delayed development. The psychologist's report documented a pattern of coercive control, isolation, and deliberate harm. Kyler had been mandated to complete psychological assessment and parenting courses. He attended them dutifully, but showed little insight into his role in Jace's abuse. His supervised visits with Jace occurred weekly at the Family Services office, awkward affairs where Kyler seemed uncomfortable and Jace remained guarded. Renee had lost all contact with both children. Her psychological evaluation revealed antisocial personality traits and an inability to empathize with children's needs. The court had terminated her parental rights permanently. Mila was thriving with her Aunt Ellie, who turned out to be everything Renee wasn't: warm, attentive, and genuinely caring. The girl visited Jace every other weekend, and slowly, the siblings were rebuilding their relationship without the toxic dynamic that had defined their early years. Grandpa, is this nail right? Jace held up his work for inspection. Red examined the slightly crooked nail. Perfect. That'll hold the roof on tight. Will birds really live in it? I guarantee it. We'll put it in the oak tree where they can see the whole yard. Jace smiled the real smile that had taken months to return. Can we paint it blue? That's my favorite color now. Blue it is. As they worked together in the fading afternoon light, Rhett thought about the cost of doing what was right. He'd lost his relationship with Kyler, at least for now. The legal battles had been expensive and emotionally draining. Some family members had accused him of overreacting, of destroying his son's marriage over nothing. But watching Jace carefully select his next nail, seeing the boy's shoulders relax when he laughed, knowing that no one was hurting him anymore, that made everything worth it. Grandpa, yeah, buddy, thank you for getting me. Rhett set down his hammer and looked at his grandson. For years old, and already thanking someone for rescuing him from his own parents. It broke Rhett's heart and filled it with purpose at the same time. You don't have to thank me for that. That's what family does. But Mommy and Daddy are family too. Sometimes family hurts you. When that happens, other family steps in to help. Jace nodded solemnly, processing this adult truth with the wisdom of a child who'd learned too much too young. Will I always live with you? As long as you need to. As long as you want to. I want to. Rhett picked up his hammer. Then that's settled. Now, how about we finish this birdhouse before dinner? They worked until the sun set behind the oak tree, building something beautiful together. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the Illinois prairie, carrying freight toward Chicago and points unknown. But Red and Jace were exactly where they needed to be, safe, together, and finally free.